Welcome to Worldview Matters, discussing controversial issues, discerning current events, defending biblical Christianity. No topic off limits. And now, here's your host, David Fiorazzo.
Hey guys, welcome to another show. Thank you so much for sharing and subscribing first to the podcast. And we've got Alex Newman with us today. Can't wait to talk to. I've got a handful of stories and news headlines to get his take on. I just appreciate his time. Most of you know him as the senior editor for the New American and contributor to the Epoch Times. He's an award-winning journalist, global reputation for hard-hitting reporting, and he also is the senior editor of the New American magazine, education writer for FreedomProject Media, and the star of the Newman Report, and that's at freedomproject.com. Alex, welcome back, or actually welcome to the first time, I think, to Worldview Matters.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we've talked for years on different platforms and outlets, and yeah, this is the first, so awesome. You just came back from, you were in Plymouth, Michigan, Liberty Pastors. We just had Dan Fisher on a few days ago. Tell us about how that went and what was your topic there?
They're always amazing. I truly believe that the Liberty Pastors network that's being built right now, these Liberty Pastors summits, are some of the most important things happening in the country. The fake media hasn't really noticed yet, so the attacks have not started flying yet. But it was phenomenal, as always. These pastors got a fire hose drink about pretty much everything you could imagine. I was asked to speak on the Great Reset and globalism and a little bit on education, climate change, transhumanism, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, all of that. So I did my best with that. But we had some very interesting folks who had not been to previous ones. We had Brigitte Gabriel come from Act for America. She presented there. We had, of course, Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room over at The Blaze, one of the top experts on economic warfare in the world. Obviously, we had Pastor Paul Blair, the great Pastor Paul Blair, and the great Dan Fisher, who was recently a guest on your program. We had Cal Beisner, Dr. Cal Beisner, the head of the Cornwall Alliance, one of the leading theologians and thinkers when it comes to properly understanding God's design for the environment, for the creation, for climate, and all of these other critical issues. Wow, it was just such a good event. They're always great events. This one was absolutely packed. I know they sold out a while ago. You couldn't have fit one more pastor and wife into that room, but it was just a great time as always.
I love those events. They're training camps, boot camps, really, for pastors. And I wasn't planning on this, but let's give them a plug, libertypastors.com. Encourage your pastor to go to one of these, and there's so many issues they need to be up to speed on. But Alex, let's go right to the headlines here. There's a German family that's been in America for 15 years, and they're facing deportation after being here that long because they homeschooled their children. They moved to the U.S. in 2008. Their application for asylum said they were fined by the German government roughly $9,000 after homeschooling their children, court documents show. And so they're here with the approval of the U.S. government, but without permanent residency or citizenship status. Before I get your comment, I want to share one of the things that came out on Twitter from Ben Zeisloft. He said, Biden let 7 million illegals pour over our southern border since he assumed office, but wants to deport a Christian family from Germany who moved to America because homeschooling is illegal in their country. We have unbelievably wicked rulers. Your perspective on this, Alex?
Couldn't have said it better myself. This is more evidence that the ruling class in this country is absolutely depraved. They've been handed over to a reprobate mind. I've been following this case with the Romica family very closely for many years. In fact, I was on the front lines of all this back when I was still living in Europe. Germany banned homeschooling. They were actually under the leadership of Adolf Hitler, the National Socialist. It became the first regime in human history to make it a crime to try to educate your own children at home. Now the Swedes more recently followed suit, and the French. But this is an all-out war on families, on educational freedom. And the judge that upheld some of these German government decisions said, we don't want parallel societies forming. In other words, everybody's got to be absorbed into this crazy Borg that is modern German ideology, theology, worldview that comes out of the government there. It's grotesque. And so we actually had the first ever global home education conference in Berlin in 2012 in support of the ruthlessly persecuted homeschool families of Germany. Just about a year or two later, the similar horrors started happening in Sweden. The government started breaking down doors, kidnapping homeschool children. They actually boarded an airliner. There was a homeschool family, the Johansson family, tried to flee from these totalitarians. They tried to flee to India. And the government sent armed stormtroopers on the plane to kidnap this little child, Dominic Johansson, and they separated him from his parents because they were homeschooling. And later they added in a couple things to try to justify it. So the commenter on Twitter, I think that's such an important point to make. I've interviewed the former head of the Customs and Border Protection. I interviewed the former head of Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. Both of them told me that the Biden administration is deliberately dissolving the border. We've got special operations forces from communist China coming across the border. We've got jihadists from every jihadist country in the world that you can think of. We've got militiamen from Venezuela pouring across the border. But this little Christian homeschool family, they're the ones that need to be deported. It's an outrage, brother.
Well, Molly Hemingway said the DOJ finally found asylum seekers it opposes, and I agree with her. And by the way, Alex got a link, or I think it's an article or video where you're talking about Biden border invasion is a war on America and nation states, and that's on OAN. But let's just move on here. We're talking about youth and how the left wants to capture the youth. The globalists want to. I'm glad you brought up Hitler. We draw those parallels when they're relevant and necessary. So Biden has announced a new American Climate Corps for the purpose of training youth for clean energy careers. Alex, he just launched this. It's a new initiative designed to train 20,000 young people on career pathways in the growing fields of clean energy, conservation, and climate resilience. And I'll get your take on this when I share. He said, well, according to the White House, the Corps will focus on equity and environmental justice. And what you break that down, what are they really trying to do?
Well, I mean, it would be bad enough if this was the equivalent of smashing big rocks into little rocks, right? Just totally wasting people's labor, wasting our tax money, doing unconstitutional things. That'd be bad enough, right? But that would be relatively harmless. I mean, yeah, it's a big waste of money, it's a big waste of labor, but we end up with small rocks, and that's okay. This is far worse. This is basically an ideological cadre of stormtroopers who are being trained to go out and serve as propagandists to undermine our freedom under the guise of saving us from global warming. And we need people to understand here what's going on with this global warming hoax. They are arguing, and I'm not elaborating or exaggerating, they are arguing that the gas you exhale, carbon dioxide, is a dangerous toxic pollution that's going to destroy the planet unless you pay taxes and submit to regulatory authority over every area of your life. I recognize that sounds crazy. That's because it is crazy. Yes. But that's what they're arguing. Now, most Americans don't believe this. AP, NORC, and the University of Chicago just released a poll earlier this year. Less than half of Americans believe that human activities are responsible for climate change. Which means we have at least some big segment of Americans who are very, very gullible. Only 38% were willing to spend even one single U.S. dollar on their monthly energy bill to fight alleged man-made global warming. And yet, Joe Biden, no legal authority, no constitutional authority, is just going to go ahead and create this Climate Corps. Think of them as climate brown shirts, speaking of Adolf Hitler, who are going to go about trying to undermine our economy, undermine our energy security, make the case that humans are bad for the planet. And of course, all of this is entirely unbiblical, right? The notion that there are too many people on the planet is totally unbiblical. God said, be fruitful and multiply. The notion that we're going to hurt the planet through the gas that we exhale, totally ridiculous, totally pseudo-scientific. But from a totalitarian perspective, this is brilliant. If you can convince people the gas they exhale is pollution, everything you do emits CO2, then everything you do comes under the jurisdiction of these tyrants.
Yep, they've got to regulate it because people are the problem. So you've got to control. Good points, Alex. And of course, the administration wouldn't say how much the program is going to cost. They never do. It's a collaborative effort and will draw on the funds from the labor, interior, agriculture, and energy departments and on and on. But we've got to move on to the next story real quick before we have to take our first break. I went to the NEA website, NEA-LGBTQC. What does that mean? That's the NEA, Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender, Queer Caucus. Talking about going after the youth, as we mentioned earlier, as Alex did. They say they're putting this out there because they're going to be very active until the 2024 election, because all their money goes to help fund Democrat causes. The NEA acknowledges the prevalence, and I'm quoting, of discrimination and violence targeted at lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning, and intersex. And to address this, here's what they're doing, Alex. 1, develop a robust, comprehensive 2024 election strategy that centers LGBTQ plus issues and concerns, including political action committee recommendations. Organizing. 2, update guidance and training that presents a LGBTQ plus narrative and confronts, especially at the local school board level. And 3, facilitate programs aimed at improving school climate and culture and the need for access to gender-affirming care. 4, how to support transitioning students, LGBTQ inclusive practices and policies. And finally, to provide resources, guidance on civil protections for LGBTQ students and staff. And they end it by saying we must stop the hate. So they're putting this out there, bold, loud, and proud. You can go to their website with all the rainbows. They've got a caucus now that's going to be heavily involved in spending money, your tax dollars, by the way, to the NEA from the taxpayers back to the Democrat Party. Alex, your thoughts on what they're proudly standing behind? And these are marching orders, but they're also just saying this is what we're going to do.
Yeah, unfortunately, the NEA is one of the most wicked organizations in our country today. They've been working to destroy Christianity and the Bible and the church for at least a century now, under the leadership of God-hating, godless, Marxist, communist, revolutionaries, people like John Dewey. These are the same people who wage war on homeschooling. Every time they get together, they pass a new resolution calling for homeschooling to be banned, that parents can't adequately educate their children. They want to groom your children for not just any sexual activity, but perverted sexual activity. I mean, even 5 or 10 years ago, everybody would have recognized that this should be criminal. Right? When you have grown adults trying to talk about sex and perversion and things like this with your children, that's the kind of people who belong nowhere near children. Actually, they belong in jail. Now, you add to that this madness that they call gender-affirming care, which, let's stop using their silly rhetoric. What we're talking about here is castrating little boys. What we're talking about here is hysterectomies and double mastectomies for little girls.
Yes.
We're talking about surgical mutilation and sterilization of children. It's incomprehensible to me that this could even be discussed in our country today. And yet you've got some segment of the population that not only thinks this is acceptable, but that thinks that we are the problem because we don't think children ought to be mutilated. And you know what? I'm a parental rights absolutist. I pretty much, parents are the final authority when it comes to their children. But I draw the line at chopping off body parts from your children. I draw the line at giving them hormones and drugs that are going to sterilize them for the rest of their lives. This is child abuse. Plain and simple. And anybody trying to dupe children into doing this, anybody castrating these children, they all belong in jail.
Wow. Amen, brother. And they use the words gender-affirming care. And by the way, we had a former transgender on, Laura Perry Smaltz, and she said, I don't want to make the road to hell more comfortable for someone by affirming them. God bless her for her stance, and Walt Heyer and other that have detransitions, others. Alex, we've got to take a break. We'll be right back on Worldview Matters.
Today's show is brought to you by Harbinger's Daily, world news biblically understood. Stay informed at harbingersdaily.com.
We're with Alex Newman today, and we're going to be talking about living under China-style globalism. That's a warning from him. Also, foreign governments gave Harvard University $218 million in less than 2 years. 60 Minutes discovers America is funding Ukraine's first responders, farmers, and small businesses. So it's not just weapons. And this one I wanted to talk to Alex about here. Will there ever be any accountability for the Biden administration? I've said for a couple decades, the left, especially if you're a liberal, Democrat, progressive, you're above the law generally. I appreciate all the investigations. I appreciate all the things they're trying to do to get to the bottom of some of this. But a lot of this, what we're finding out now, could have been uncovered before the 2020 election. But here's this latest headline, Alex. Hunter Biden's financial records show a payment directly from Beijing listing Joe as beneficiary. There we go. The ties with China that they've been denying. So Hunter Biden received wires originating in Beijing for more than $250,000 from Chinese business partners during the summer of 2019, listing the Delaware home of Joe Biden as the beneficiary address for the funds. And they received records of 2 wires originating from China, Beijing. BHR Partners, a joint venture between Hunter Biden's Rosemont Seneca and Chinese investment firm Bohai Capital. Alex Newman, what will come of this? We're seeing a lot of these headlines now. This truth kind of is coming out on certain outlets. The mainstream media basically punts on these stories.
Yeah, well, Joe Biden is really a puppet, right? He's a two-bit player in a much broader global scheme. And what these evildoers have shown over and over again, and ultimately we're dealing with forces from the pit of hell, not flesh and blood, right? But what these evil individuals have shown is that they'll very happily throw somebody under the bus if it advances their cause. I mean, they did it to the Cuomo brothers just recently, right? These were faithful toadies and lackeys of the deep state, the globalist establishment, and they both got thrown under the bus. And Joe Biden is no more special than they were. As soon as Joe Biden outlives his usefulness, they may throw him under the bus. It's just what they do, right? And it's what historically amoral and immoral people have done. The reality is Joe Biden has betrayed his country. Joe Biden has committed horrific crimes against the United States of America. Joe Biden has flagrantly violated his oath of office. He has aided and abetted America's most significant geopolitical enemy, the Communist Party of China. And there needs to be accountability here. Whether there will be, I don't know. What we see, you're absolutely right, is this 2-tiered system of justice, really 3-tiered system of justice, where the globalist elites, as long as they're serving their function, are typically totally insulated from accountability for their criminal activity. You have those people who are persecuted, people like, of course, Donald Trump, a lot of his attorneys who are now being strung up on these phony charges. And then you have, the people in the middle where, typically you're probably going to be fine unless you do something so outrageous that you get a lot of attention. And it'll be interesting to see. I mean, really, what should happen here? Obviously, Joe Biden needs to be impeached. Obviously, the whole family needs to be thrown in jail. That would be justice after a fair trial, of course, with a jury of their peers. But they may just wheel him off and let him sail off into the sunset. We'll have to see what happens. But I wouldn't hold my breath waiting for accountability. We're watching what's happening with Hunter Biden now, where they're going to string him up on a few very minor charges on drugs and guns and things. But the treason, no, we don't want to talk about that.
I like how you said after a fair trial, of course. By the way, I always ask this. What if the tables were turned and instead of Hunter Biden, what if it was Donald Trump Jr.? When Trump was in office, can you imagine the firestorm in the media and everybody it would be headlines 24/7, but we've got to move on, Alex. 60 Minutes. I was a little surprised that 60 Minutes is in this headline. They discovered America is funding Ukraine's first responders, farmers, and small businesses. So billions of dollars. And this is what I don't understand. Maybe you can help explain it to our audience, that why do we have absolutely no say in billions of dollars going to Zelensky's Ukraine? And I know there's people over there that are hurting. I know the church over there is hurting. I know they need our prayers. People are impoverished. The war is tearing up that country. But our money is helping really a globalist government over there, is it not? And now we've to find out that we're helping buy seeds and fertilizer for farmers and paying the salaries of first responders. I mean, when does that end?
Yeah, it is so outrageous. It's hard to know what to even say about it, David. Zelensky is a corruptocrat. He's a globalist. He's actually betrayed his own country repeatedly over and over again. And this is coming to me from some of the most patriotic Ukrainians you'll find anywhere. People who are willing to give their lives to defend their country, saying Zelensky is a globalist plant. He's a globalist stooge. He's a pervert. We knew a lot of this going into it. He was totally manufactured by this billionaire oligarch, Ihor Kolomoisky, who now is being arrested and indicted, who's wanted now, it looks like, in multiple jurisdictions across the world for massive corruption. This is a guy who is very close to the Kremlin. This is a guy who has made money by looting the public. And this is a guy who had a controlling interest in Burisma Holdings that, of course, put Hunter Biden on the board for $50,000 a month because obviously he's just such a great businessman and such an expert in energy extraction, right? I mean, the corruption is so deep here. And then you add to that a new level of absurdity. The United States government is more bankrupt. There's never been a bigger debtor in the entire history of mankind. There's never been an entity in as much debt as the U.S. government. The idea that we should borrow money from communist China while they've got their missiles pointed at us so that we can give it to Zelensky and his corrupt little buddies to park in secret bank accounts. I mean, it is such a disgrace. I really believe that every member of Congress who's voting to fund these appropriations needs to be removed from office at the earliest possible opportunity, hopefully the next election.
It is mind-boggling. It really is. And I don't blame some Americans for feeling, well, this is a lost cause. We vote to try to get the right people in there, and then we're funding, we're doing stuff like this with our tax dollars. Anyway, we've got to move on, Alex. But I think it was the Babylon Bee. I remember seeing a meme. It might have been the Bee or just a regular meme of Zelensky in his sweatshirt when he was standing in front of Congress. And I think it was something about, hey, accepting the award for Best Actor. Anyway, it had Zelensky. He's acting. Give me more money.
Right.
Give me more money. So you have something on living under China-style globalism, and it's a warning. And you quote World Economic Forum founder Klaus Schwab, and I love when you do his accent. I'm not even going to try to do it. You do a pretty good job at that. He said that China is a role model for many countries. Well, we kind of know what Schwab thinks, but Alex, share a little bit more about this.
So actually, that was a segment from a broader panel discussion we did. It was put together by the Sovereignty Coalition and the Committee on the Present Danger of China. So this is Frank Gaffney, former Assistant Secretary of Defense under Ronald Reagan, Reggie Littlejohn, and we had a lot of great people join us. We had Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann. We had international law professor Francis Boyle from the University of Illinois, a lot of great people. And the point of the session was to warn about the danger that these globalists pose to the United States, and of course how communist China is using these globalist institutions to further its own power. And so I was asked to address, what does the world look like? What does life look like for an American if this globalist coup succeeds? And my point was, and I encourage people to go watch this, life in the United States and around the world is going to look a lot like life in communist China. Zero freedom, very little prosperity except for the elites willing to sell their souls, and ruthless persecution of the church, total control and regimentation over every area of your life, social credit scores, and all the rest of it. Folks, that's the direction we're heading in, and that's not my opinion. These evildoers have been telling us this for decades, right? Evildoers in the United States helped bring Chairman Mao to power. They helped build up that regime. David Rockefeller went over there in the early 70s, wrote in the New York Times that the social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in human history. George Soros says the communist Chinese should own the new world order, like the United States owned the previous one. And of course, as you pointed out, Klaus Schwab says China is a role model for many countries. This is sick. We do not want to be anything like communist China. It is actually the most murderous dictatorship that's ever existed in human history. Mm-hmm. But that's the direction we're headed, folks, if you don't get active, if you don't get involved.
You said something very important. They're not hiding this agenda. They've been talking about this for decades. The World Economic Forum, the globalists, the power elites. Their words are out there. Their videos. You can find them. You can quote them. Alex, I know this is speculation. Do you think more Americans are starting to catch on?
More Americans are starting to catch on. I know for a fact. I mean, you look at the polling data. You just talk to normal people. I tell people, turn off your TV for a minute, and including the Fox News. Turn off the Fox News and go out and talk to regular people. Talk to your plumber. Talk to your Uber driver. Talk to the waitress at the restaurant. Just talk to normal people that you run across in your everyday life. And what you're going to find out real quick is once they get over their initial fear, like, oh, I don't want them to think I'm a bad person, right? That's what the media says. Once they get over their initial fear and they open up and talk to you, you'll find that everyday Americans, by the tens of millions, maybe more, all across this country, recognize that we're being lied to, that evildoers are running wild, and that we have to turn this ship around. I'm really encouraged by what I'm seeing as far as people waking up. I'm really encouraged by what I'm seeing in the churches and with the pastors. God is doing something very significant in our country right now. I don't want to say we're not headed for tough times. In fact, I believe our country is facing judgment right now. But a lot of people are recognizing we need to turn back to God. We need to turn away from this wickedness that we've allowed to run wild. And the future of our children is at stake here, too. So,
Alex, one more question, and this is on, speaking of China, they gave $16 million to Harvard University. Switzerland, Hong Kong, who else? The UK gave almost $52 million. So foreign governments are giving American universities, this is not just Harvard, but Harvard is one of them, getting a lot of money. In the last 2 years, $218 million. And one of the things they say that they're trying to do, apparently, is they believe the main reason for these, the money coming from other countries, is cultural placement. And I don't know a lot about that, but I think you do. And you know that when we get money coming in from other countries to any American institution, there is going to be red tape. What do you know about this? What can you tell us about it?
Oh, I'm sure the butchers in Beijing, these very kind communists who just want to cut out organs from political dissidents and break down churches and put people in re-education, I'm sure they're just really generous. They just thought they'd give back to the community. Folks, if you believe that stuff, you are just so gullible. I've got some really nice beachfront property in Nebraska. Talk to me later. But folks, this is deadly serious. The communist Chinese and all these foreign powers are giving this money because they want something. Use your head, right? They're not just giving it away out of the goodness of their heart. And we know what communist China is doing. They want to take over the world with the help of the fifth column right here in our country. And folks, I believe Harvard needs to be regarded as a very, very suspicious institution. It is no longer a legitimate educational institution. It's a clown car, but unfortunately, it's a very significant threat to our nation because so many of our nation's leaders are indoctrinated there into a hatred of God, a hatred of the United States, a hatred of the institutions and the morality that God has ordained. It's a major threat to our country.
Alex Newman, you might remember this. Harvard University in 1636, they had the logo there with the three sections, Truth for Christ and the Church. Well, somewhere in the early 1800s, they removed Christ and the Church and just had one word, Veritas. But now they're doing all kinds of crazy things that are against the truth. But they started, this is one of the verses they were founded on, John 17:3. This is eternal life, that they may know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. American universities, a lot of them, the earliest universities put out pastors and theologians. They were based on the Bible. Friends, we have strayed so far from those days, but we need to be aware of these things and now how to respond. First, don't send your kids there, right, Alex? But hey, we appreciate your time. LibertySentinel.org, the Newman Report, the New American. We've got to have you back. I love spending time with you. You're just so up to speed and so informative. Alex Newman, God bless you, brother. Thanks.
God bless you, too. It's an honor and a pleasure. Thank you, David.
All right, we'll talk to you later. Tomorrow, Seiko Woods is on the show. Wednesday, Carl Kirby of Reasons for Hope. And Thursday, we've got another Freedom Project veteran, Dr. Duke Pesta. We're going to talk about the dangers of DEI. That's Thursday. Well, guys, thank you. We're out of time. Please share on social media because we're kind of limited. And thanks for your support. God bless you. And as always, keep speaking the truth about things that matter.